This lecture picks up as we explore the development of the Hindu tradition from the Vedas onwards. The Vedas themselves are fairly worldly texts. The ritual of the yajna and the fire sacrifice is designed, on the one hand, to maintain cosmic order, Rita. That's the universal or public aspect of Vedic religion, but the private aspect of the Vedic religion is, in essence, a kind of quid pro quo between the sponsor of a sacrifice, the yajnamana, or the one who pays for the sacrifice to take place, and the gods who are invited, offered a meal, and expected to deliver something in return, some sort of material benefit to the sacrificer. There are really no ideals of pacifism or renunciation in the Vedas. They are, along with being worldly texts, also very militaristic texts, also texts which celebrate the heroism and militarism of the Vedic gods, paralleling the martial nature of Vedic society in general. Vedic religion is one in which things transpire on earth as they do in heaven. It's not until after the Vedic period that we get some of the classical doctrines of Hindu theology, such as those of karma, reincarnation, the possibility of escape from the wheel of rebirth. Vedas say very little about reincarnation. They say that when people die and are cremated, the smoke of their cremation is evaporated up to the moon and then rains down again in the form of water. Water is absorbed by plants, and the life essence of individuals is then transferred back to the animal world when animals eat plants. And so there is a kind of continuation of life essence, but no idea that we pass from one body to another through an orderly cycle of reincarnation, and that we are rewarded or punished in accordance with our karma. Such principles of classical Hindu theology don't appear until after the Vedas. The early commentarial texts on the Vedas are known as the Brahmanas and then Aranyakas. Finally, by the mid first millennium BCE, get the group of texts that are associated with what we might call classical Hindu theology and philosophy, the Upanishads, which are followed by the Puranas, another group of texts containing the foundational myths of the Trimurti, the trinity of the principal gods of Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. All of these texts are in Sanskrit rather than the highly formalized Sanskrit verse in which the Vedas are composed. The Vedas are really meant to be recited in a musical sort of manner. The Upanishads and Puranas were written in a colloquial form of Sanskrit that was closer to the spoken language of the time, Sanskrit prose rather than Sanskrit verse. Upanishad means to sit close in, and the social context in which the Upanishads developed was basically one of renegade Brahmin priests who were dissatisfied with merely reciting the Vedas in the strict ritual context demanded by the tradition. We sought instead the deeper meaning behind the cosmology of the Vedas. Why are we here? Where are we going? What happens? What's the point of all of this? The teachers named in the Upanishads represent various schools of thought regarding the eternality of the soul. They're depicted as debating the specifics of very deep questions with one another, are also depicted as having been in dialogue with religious teachers who would deny the existence of the soul altogether and deny the existence of God altogether. Such teachers we will catch up with later on in the course. These are the early Jains and Buddhists. So it's important to keep in mind that the later religions of Jainism and Buddhism came out of this exact phase in the development of Hinduism. We also get a sense in the Upanishads of the birth of a much more liberal theological tradition than was apparent in early Vedic Hinduism. The Upanishadic teachers had a broad audience, including non Brahmins and also women. So, although both men and women belonged to the Brahmin caste, in early Vedic Hinduism, only men performed ritual duties. That is, there were both Brahmin men and women, but only Brahmin men earned a living by reciting the Vedas. In the Upanishadic texts, gurus or teachers are depicted as engaging in dialogue with female religious seekers, as well as others who fall outside the realm of those who would be considered religious authorities from the point of view of early Vedic Hinduism. In the last lecture, I mentioned the fact that there are a number of gods mentioned and celebrated in the Vedas, but that no one among them is said to be the supreme god, the first god, the primary god, anything like that. By the Vedic commentaries, one of the gods mentioned in the earliest Vedic text, Brahma, emerges as a clear favorite and a contender for the position of the first and supreme god, the creator who precedes the others. Parenthetically, everyone always wonders where all the heads and arms come from in representations of Hindu gods and goddesses. Symbolically, they are depicted as representing the various powers of the gods and goddesses. There's a question in art history as to which came first, statue representations with multiple heads and arms, or dances like these. This is actually a East Asian dance. Bodhisattva in Buddhism, Avalokiteshvara, the god of compassion in Buddhism. But it's possible that dances such as these came before iconography depicting gods and goddesses as having many hands, and perhaps the statue iconography was meant to try to emulate elaborate dances such as those. The later Vedas and Vedic commentaries begin to identify Brahma as Tad Ekam, that one thing out of which the differentiation of mind, matter, time, and space in the Nasadiya Sukta emerged. Brahma is referred to as the womb of non existence and existence. He's identified as being the bija, or the seed from which language itself, the primordial syllable om, emerged. It was believed, by the way, that the Sanskrit language preceded all other creation in the Vedas. That language was there. The language was there as part of the very fabric of the universe from the beginning of time. By the early Upanishads, Brahma is depicted as a god primary, superior to all the others. He is called the string, the sutra, passing like a thread through the universe. We get the sense, perhaps then, of Brahma as a kind of controller figure, or someone who has the kind of capacity for manipulating and shaping the physical world. God of the Bible. As the Upanishads develop, however, the idea of Brahma as a kind of omnipotent deity is replaced by a more nuanced and esoteric concept of God. The word Brahma, which is a masculine noun in Sanskrit, is actually replaced in the Upanishads by a neuter noun, Brahman. Ma is the name of the four-headed god above gods of the Vedas. Brahman, however, refers to the divine consciousness in which all sentient beings participate. Brahman is the sum total of consciousness of all living beings. And the great theological mystery of the Upanishads is the question of our exact relationship as individuals to this sum total consciousness. Brahman is sometimes referred to as the Godhead or cosmic consciousness. Remember that the Vedic account of creation in the Nasadiya Sukta leaves ambiguous the actual relationship of mind to matter, consciousness to the body. It makes no hard and fast distinction, as does the biblical book of Genesis, between God, material creation, and then the creation of later individually conscious sentient beings. The Upanishads tell us that every sentient being has a soul or Atman, and that this is what is transferred from body to body, life to life throughout the cycle of rebirth. But then, and this is the real central theological mystery of the Upanishads, the individual soul is itself somehow, in fact, identical with or connected to Brahman, the cosmic soul. The famous refrain of the Upanishads, when the Guru is asked, what is the individual soul, what is the Atman? He replies, Tat Tvam Asi. You, Tvam, are Asi, that, with Tvam referring to the individual soul, and Tat referring to Brahman, the cosmic soul, the oversoul. The analogy that I give is to that of the analogy that I give is that of the mystery of the Trinity in Christian theology. What does it mean that the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit are all of the same substance or essence? This very question was the subject of intense theological debate within the early church and remains from the point of view of the church an esoteric and dogmatic matter. What does it mean for the individual soul, the Atman, to be identical in some sense with Brahman? This is a question that the gurus of the Upanishads address by means of simile and metaphor, but never answer in a direct and literal sense. One point of contrast that we can note between Western monotheism and the Hindu Upanishadic tradition is the acceptability of the idea that one is oneself in some sense identical with God or universal consciousness. Historically, it's been a dangerous heresy to call yourself God in Western monotheism. In Hinduism, however, it's no problem to say that everyone we meet, or even every sentient being, every person that you pass on the street, is somehow themselves divine or participating in divine consciousness. This is the origin of the Hindu greeting namaste in Sanskrit, that is, namas, respect, reverence, obeisance. It literally means prostrating or bowing down before, te, to you, that is, prostrating yourself before the divinity in the person you are respectfully greeting. Atiti Devo Bhava, or Guest is God, is the slogan of an ongoing campaign sponsored by the Indian government to promote Indian tourism. So, namaste, reverence to the divine principle within you, is now also a slogan of the Indian Tourism Administration. The question, the Tattvam Asi, you are God proposition, raises a serious question, though. If we all are, in some sense, God or divine consciousness, then why are we trapped in these finite mortal bodies? And what is the precise relationship of our physical body, the obvious thing that is the vehicle of our consciousness, to our true eternal self, or to Brahman? And this is the question that the Upanishadic teachers are at pain to explain through metaphor. Each time a student asks their teacher in an Upanishadic dialogue, is this the self? Is this the self? Is this the soul? Is that the soul? Is the soul a tiny little man who exists up somewhere in my head and who is watching everything, hearing and seeing the input of the senses projected in the manner of a picture show within the mind? And the teachers of the Upanishads say, iti neti, no, it's not, iti na iti, it's not this, it's not that. The Atman within the body is rather like salt dissolved in water. The Atman is said to be the seed from which the self grows. The further problem amid all this is the question of what it could mean for the individual soul to be identical with God. If we are Brahman, or if our individual soul or Atman is somehow identical to universal consciousness, the Godhead, what is it that happens to us after we die? Shouldn't we be mortal? Here the Upanishadic teachers introduce the concept of samsara, or the cycle of rebirth, which implies in some sense that we are immortal. That is, that upon death, the Atman as a vehicle for our individual consciousness passes into another body. Classical Hinduism assumes that the form that that one takes in a new birth can be any among the varieties of sentient beings. Of course, you can be reborn again as a human being, you can even be reborn as a heavenly being, a demigod, a celestial being. There are hells in classical Hinduism. You can also be reborn as a ghost, condemned to wander the earth. You can be reborn as any species of animal also. The Atman represents the immortal aspect to our being, passing from body to body as we traverse samsara, or the cycle of rebirth. What is it that determines where and what form we will be reborn? This, on the model of classical Hinduism, is proportional to one's past actions. Karma, which simply means an action in Sanskrit, is essentially the fuel that drives one through samsara, the cycle of rebirth. So, in some Hindu traditions and in the Jain tradition, the objective is to burn up, use up all of your karma so that you will no longer be propelled through the cycle of rebirth, that you will not be born again. Karma is, according to classical Hinduism, of two kinds: positive and negative. Morally positive actions engender positive karma and result in a more comfortable birth in future circumstances, while conversely, morally negative actions generate bad karma and result in less fortuitous births in the future, either being reborn as a human in less fortunate circumstances or even being reborn as an animal. In classical Hinduism, provides an answer to the problem of theodicy. That is, the question of why it is that bad things happen to otherwise good people. So, a Christian theodicy, for example, why is it that a person who lives a perfectly upstanding life, who goes to church every week, is nice to everybody, volunteers at the soup kitchen, gives money to the Salvation Army, gets cancer when they're 30 years old, gets stomach cancer when they're 30 years old? How can we possibly account for that terrible thing happening? A Christian theodicy might involve an explanation like, well, God has a plan for all people. Something positive that we can't immediately see for ourselves might come out of this person's terrible circumstances. Right now, that positive thing is known to God and God alone. We must trust that in His wisdom, there is some positive reason for what seems like otherwise an unfair situation for this young man or woman. Similarly, in Hinduism, karma allows us to account for why it is that life isn't truly fair for everybody. We're all born into the world with differing circumstances. Some of us have obvious advantages and disadvantages. Some of us have obviously more comfortable lives than others. Karma offers an effective way to account for such differences, apparent unfairness, inequalities in the world by saying, well, people who are born in more fortunate circumstances have a higher store of good karma. That is, that they have committed more morally positive acts in the past, and the fruition of that action, the fruition of that karma, is now expressing itself in terms of their fortuitous life circumstances. One thing that characterizes different schools of Hinduism, and also which distinguishes Hinduism from Jainism and Buddhism, is the question of the directive for eventually escaping samsara, or the cycle of rebirth. Escape from the cycle of rebirth, moksha, release, liberation from samsara, is uniformly regarded as the final religious goal for Hindus, Jains, and Buddhists. The question is, how do you get there? We'll talk more next week about the three paths to liberation according to the Bhagavad Gita. These are the paths of devotion, the path of action, and the path of knowledge: bhakti, karma, and jnana yoga. Karma yoga, the path of action, involves attainment of successively better rebirths, the fulfillment of dharma, or social duty. Yogic forms of Hinduism, which emphasize the importance of eliminating one's karmic store altogether, we can categorize as belonging to renunciant forms of Hinduism. This is a form of Hinduism which tends to reject the idea of social duty or caste duty altogether. We have then what we might contrast the worldly path of action, accumulating good karma through performing the duty that's expected of you as a member of your caste, with the renunciant path, the path of yogis, the path of later Jains and Buddhists, who would give up their household life, really give up their expected social duty of the member of the caste that they're born into in pursuit of liberation from rebirth, usually involving yogic exercises and austerities. Burning karma by kindling one's inner fire, or tapas, the fire in one's stomach you remember from last lecture, being the idea of a literal inner heat, a fire in one's stomach that, from the Vedic point of view, cooks food again, generates body heat, and from the later yogic and Upanishadic point of view, becomes the furnace through which the yogi can burn karma, exhaust karma, to ensure their liberation from samsara sooner. What does it mean to perform one's duty according to one's caste? Classical Hindu texts outline a regimented guide for living life as a productive member of society, explaining one's social duty, and this is what dharma means here, in accordance with one's caste, the four castes named in the Rig Veda, and how old you are. That is your stage of life or your ashrama. This is called Varna, Ashrama, Dharma. The belief is that if every person in each of the four castes lives according to their social duty prescribed to them at each stage in their life, then you'll have a functioning society, a society with priests who maintain the cosmic order and ritual, kings and knights who protect everyone, the capitalist merchant class, and the manual labor class, which fulfills those necessary functions. For stages of life, ashramas for Hindus of eligible castes begins with that of student, when you are learning what the duty specific to your caste, the dharma specific to your caste, consists in. That of gainfully employed adult, a householder carrying out the requisite function as a member of your caste to ensure a smoothly functioning society. Then, as an early retiree, one who is entitled to enjoy your retirement account and the fruits of your labor. And finally, when you're an old person, as a later retiree, there's an expectation that you'll retreat into a life dedicated towards religious concerns. Often, old people, retirees, sannyasis, will retreat to a secluded life in a forest hermitage to concentrate on a life of meditation, yoga, and the study of sacred scriptures. The four life stages in classical Hinduism correspond to what are called the four Purusha Arthas, or the goals of a well lived life, the objectives of a well lived life. So, as a student, you're supposed to absorb yourself in the study of Dharma, which has the specific meaning of duty according to your caste, which has the general meaning of understanding what it is to be righteous, understanding how to make moral choices, and understanding the ethical wisdom of classical Hindu scriptures and mythology. The classical Hinduism doesn't spurn wealth, artha, as something sinful or otherwise irreligious. Accumulation of wealth, so long as it is undertaken in an ethical or dharmically appropriate way, is still treated as one of the four major aims of life, the four objectives of what it means to live a full and well-lived life. Just so kama, or physical pleasure, is considered an appropriate objective. It's interesting to note that kama corresponds to the early retiree phase of one's life, according to the Varnashrama system. So you're a student, then you're a 9 to 5 job person, and then by the time you're maybe 55, you get to live your enjoy your life with your grandkids and go on the carnival cruises and live it up a little bit. From the point of view of the Varnashrama system, moksha, the ultimate goal, the long-term goal of freedom from the cycle of rebirth, is something that you don't have to concentrate on until you are a senior citizen. Only a small number of people in ancient India were professional renunciants or professional religieux, or yogis who went off and spent their entire life in search of religious truth and freedom from rebirth. Most people, and this was the expectation, most people sought eventual freedom from rebirth, just living a normal life, just by living a normal good life in accordance with Dharma, in accordance with the expectation of the caste that they were born into, with the understanding from the point of view of karma yoga, the path to eventual release from the cycle of rebirth through good works, that moksha, or freedom from rebirth, would be an eventual reward in the distant future. It's important to remember that the esoteric remarks of the Upanishads regarding the nature of the eternal soul and its unity with Brahman or Godhead is a form of philosophical Hinduism that was restricted to a small group of literate people, the teachers of the Upanishads, their disciples, and the learned traditions which transmitted these texts. Most Hindus' understanding of their tradition comes by way of the Puranas, the slightly later Sanskrit texts, 18 of them in total, that tell the stories of the lives of the major gods, their disagreements, alliances, the dramas that played out between them, and which form the basis for mythological traditions that are carried on not just in Sanskrit but also in the various vernacular languages of India. The subject of the 18 Puranas are divided evenly between stories concentrating on each of the three major gods who emerged with their own respective devotional traditions during the era of classical Hinduism. These three are referred to often as the Hindu Trinity or the Trimurti, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. Brahma identified as the creator god, Vishnu as the maintainer god, who periodically takes physical form, is born on earth in order to aid humankind in some way or another, and Shiva, who is the destroyer, the god of yogis, dangerous animals, poisonous substances, and the agent of the periodic cyclical destruction and reabsorption of the physical world that we all inhabit. Although 6 Puranas are assigned to Brahma, 6 to Shiva, and 6 to Vishnu, only two of the major deities of the Hindu Trinity would emerge with sustained devotional traditions of their own. These are Vishnu and Shiva. Devotion to Brahma started to die out around the beginning of the first millennium, to the extent that today the only active Brahma temple, or the only major active Brahma temple in India, is in the city of Pushkar in Rajasthan. Nearly all Hindus today identify as either Vaishnavas or Shaivas, that is, those who maintain that the supreme god is either Vishnu or Shiva. So for Vaishnavas or Vaishnavites, Vishnu is the first and supreme god. For Shaiva, Shiva is the first or supreme god. The majority of Hindus today are Vaishnavas. Shaivism is predominant in South India, portions of North India like Kashmir and Bengal. Competing claims to supremacy of each of the three gods of the Trimurti plays out in the Puranas, in the mythology of the Puranas, and also in images like this one, known to us from the Puranic text as the image of Vishnu asleep on the cosmic ocean, so asleep in the celestial ocean. And from the point of view of the Vaishnava Puranas, the visible material world that we inhabit is in fact generated by the dream of Vishnu. He is asleep on the cosmic ocean, floating on the serpent Sesha, receiving an eternal foot rub from his consort Lakshmi. But the paradox of this image is that while Vishnu dreams, Brahma, who here is seated in meditation upon a lotus which grows out of a stalk emanating from Vishnu's navel, Brahma is the one actually projecting or manifesting the visible world that all of us inhabit. That is, Brahma is projecting the dream of Vishnu to make it solid. With regard to the question of which of the two gods in this situation is superior to the other, which of the two precedes the other in time, if we regard the lotus stalk as a kind of natal image of mother to child, we might think that Brahma is like the child of Vishnu. So you think about the lotus stalk as like an umbilical cord. It's coming out of Vishnu, which would suggest that Vishnu is the mother and Brahma is the baby child tethered to Vishnu. So Vishnu must have come first. Vishnu must be the parent. But looking closely, we see that the stalk is actually tethered to Vishnu's belly button. Vishnu's belly button, which would suggest that Brahma is the parent or mother of Vishnu. The image is then unresolved and reprises the paradox of mutual creation first expressed in the Nasadiya Sukta. It affirms again the mystery of creation. And pushes aside or defers the notion that any one single deity created the world. The image also portends some of the more mystical dimensions of Vaishnava Hinduism, as we'll discuss more next week in reference to the Bhagavad Gita. The ultimate resolution to the question of the nature of the identity of the Atman and the Brahman lies at the deepest level in our own identity as characters in the mind of God. That is, what we believe to be our own unique individual consciousness turns out, on the deepest analysis, according to the Gita, to in fact have its origins in Vishnu's cosmic dream. This is the notion of Maya, Maya, the cosmic illusion that we all inhabit, which is in fact a projection of the mind of Vishnu. The Puranas associated with Vishnu describe the 10 forms that he takes once every world age. So Vishnu himself explains that he takes a bodily form in order to assist humankind in some way during a period of decline in Dharma. Vishnu is born on earth in some form 10 times every world age, that is 10 times every 4,320,000 years. Vishnu's appearance in physical form on Earth is called an avatar, so his 10 avatars, bodily incarnations, known as the Dasa Avatara, the 10 avatars. Avatar is our English word derived from that Sanskrit word, avatara, which means one who has crossed over. This is just a diagram overview of cosmological time according to classical Hinduism. The span during which Vishnu takes his 10 avatars is known as the Chaturuyuga. Chaturuyuga, the four yugas, or periods during which there is a general decline in dharma and righteousness. We begin with Satya Yuga, the age of truth, after which adherence to righteousness declines. We're now in the furthest declined world age, the Kali Yuga, unfortunately, and we are 9 avatars deep. The 10th and final avatara will be Kalki, Vishnu's avatar, to usher in the end of this world age. Every Chaturayuga is bounded by a cataclysmic world-ending flood, preceded by a stereotyped set of apocalyptic events. Not unlike the book of Revelation in the Bible, Vishnu appears here, fearsome horseman Kalki, a herald of the coming flood and end of the world age and destruction of most of humankind. His 10 avatars in order are those of a fish, a turtle, giant boar, a half man, half lion, a dwarf, a lumberjack, and finally 4 human births as Rama and Krishna, major characters in the Hindu epics of the Ramayana and Mahabharata, and then most recently as the Buddha, another human being, and finally as Kalki, the herald of the coming end of the world age. Some have made the observation that the progression of the 10 avatars of Vishnu corresponds roughly to the evolution of animal life from the point of view of Darwinian evolution. So he starts out as a fish and moves to a reptile, to a mammal, to a more advanced mammal, finally to a human being. The story of Vishnu as fish is a quite interesting one. It involves the king of the previous world era before the flood, King Manu, who discovers one day on the beach a talking fish, who implores King Manu to take him home and to build him a tanker or a receptacle large enough for him as he continues to grow, and explains that he will explain his youthfulness to the king at a future date. So at first Manu is able to keep him in a little jar, then the fish keeps growing and he has to put him in a pond. Finally the fish keeps growing and he has to house him in a SeaWorld style tank, until one day when the fish explains that a great rain will soon come and that King Manu has to build a boat big enough for himself and his family so that the fish can tow him to safety. Vishnu here is the fish. The flood is the interstitial flood that bridges one Kali Yuga, end of the previous world age, to the Satya Yuga, the first portion of the new world age. King Manu and his family are the only ones to survive the flood. Vishnu, as the fish, tows them to the one remaining piece of dry land where they're able to escape being destroyed by the flood. Obviously, we have a parallel here with the famous story of Noah's Ark from the Bible. And if you add them all up, there's something like 140 stories in different religions and mythical traditions from cultures all around the world relating to a flood in ancient times that destroyed the world. And often in these stories, there's only a small group of people who are able to escape the flood and repopulate the earth afterwards. It's kind of an amazing thing. Some have suggested that the global spread of the primordial flood myth can only be sufficiently explained if it represents a living memory of an actual historical event. And those people have suggested that perhaps there was passed down through the generations a memory of the flooding that resulted from glacial lakes at the end of the last ice age. So much of the state of Montana was covered in this huge lake, a volume of half of Lake Michigan, glacial Lake Missoula, that was contained by glaciers, walls of ice that were half a mile high and that would periodically flood this part of the state in these enormous, massive single flood events that, of course, created much of the landscape of that part of America today. We know that it's called a mega flood by geologists. Some people have suggested that perhaps the stories of the flood myths are memories of our Ice Age ancestors about these glacial lake flooding events. Others have suggested that the primordial flood myths can be explained through diffusion or the gradual spread of the flood myth from one region to another as people traveled from place to place, telling the same story and adapting it with different local variations. The story of Vishnu's second incarnation is that of him as a turtle or kurma. This is the story of the alliance between two sets of demigods, the Suras and the Asuras, um, in order to defeat the curse of the Rishi Durvasa. So the story begins as a divine grudge. Durvasa had given Indra, lord of the gods, a garland for his elephant, which Indra allowed his elephant to trample on. He wasn't paying attention, and the garland fell off, and the elephant trampled on it. So Durvasa was offended by this, and he cursed the gods, causing them to lose their power and immortality, and causing the earth to descend into chaos. So, seeking help from the higher gods, the Suras approached Brahma, who redirected them to Vishnu. Vishnu took form on earth as a giant turtle and instructed the Suras to pair up with their longtime enemies, the Asuras, to snap off this huge mountain, Mandara, turn it upside down and use it as a churning stick or like an agitator, the thing that goes in the middle of the washing machine that goes back and forth, and to tie around the mountain this giant snake, the serpent Vasuki, so that the Suras would tug the snake from one side, and then alternating the Asuras would tug her from the other side, so that they would churn up the ocean. And Vishnu's role in all this was to sink to the bottom of the ocean to act as a kind of platform or base that they could rest Mount Mandara on, so that this whole operation would work. So the Suras tugging the snake's tail, and the Asuras tugging its head. They churned the ocean until from it emerged the wish-fulfilling cow, Surabhi, so this magical cow that you could, it's kind of like a genie cow that you could ask anything and it would magically grant it for you. Varuni, the goddess of wine, comes out of the ocean as it's churned. The tree of paradise, troops of divine ladies or apsaras, and finally, the thing that they were really after, Amrita, or the elixir of immortality, which the Suras and the Asuras needed to get back their power and immortality, which Durvasa had taken from them. So it was kind of like a huge party, but with any party this fun, inevitably there are going to be some party fouls. And so with the turning of the ocean, the case was no different. not only did the suras and asuras turn up all of the party goodies, but they also turned up a very strong poison, a poisonous byproduct. Visha, the opposite of the elixir of immortality, the Amrita, so they're turning up pairs of opposites. Here, Shiva has to step in to save the suras and asuras from poisoning the ocean and poisoning themselves with this terrible tonic byproduct. And here he scoops up the Visha and drinks it himself. This is where Shiva gets the epithet of Nilakanta, or the blue-throated one, because he's able to contain the poison. He's able to drink it safely, but it stains his throat blue, so he's sometimes depicted with a blue patch on his throat, remembering this event. This is another example in the Puranas of Shiva and Vishnu working together, working in consort to help out during a time of crisis. The fourth avatar of Vishnu is Narasimha. Narasimha means man lion, in which he defeats the demon Hiranyakashipu. This is the story that is the origin of the Hindu festival Holi. After Vishnu, in his previous incarnation, had killed his brother, Hiranyakashipu plotted after a way to kill Vishnu. And he performs all these yogic austerities in order to convince Brahma to give him special powers. And this is kind of how the setup to all of the drama in the Hindu epics and myths. It's one bad guy. One bad guy does a bunch of yogic austerities and gets some special boon of invincibility from another god, and then everyone has to work out a solution to it. So the story of Hiranyakashipu is no different. And the boon that he gets from Brahma is that Hiranyakashipu tries to think of an arrangement whereby he is invincible to everyone. So he says that he wants to be invincible, that he cannot die inside or outside a residence or house, that he cannot be killed during the daytime or at night. He cannot be killed on the ground or in the sky. He cannot be killed by any weapon. He cannot be killed by any human being or animal. So, in order to slay Hiranyakashipu, Vishnu takes the form of Narasimha, half man, half lion. Since he's not fully human or animal, Narasimha escapes the clause in Brahma's boon that Hiranyakashipu could not be killed by either man or animal, because he's neither. He's both of them at the same time. He's able to kill Hiranyakashipu at twilight, which is neither day nor night. He kills him on the threshold of the courtyard, so he's not inside a house or outside a house. And he uses his lion nails, which are neither animate nor inanimate weapons. The Hindu festival of Holi, then this is the holiday of colors, when everyone throws the colored chalk on each other. This remembers the cruel attempt to incinerate Hiranyakashipu's son Prahlada by his evil aunt Holika. That's where the name Holi comes from, who tricked him into sitting on a fire when she was wearing a fire-resistant cloak, telling Prahladika that he could come to the fire and he wouldn't be burnt up. But in the end, it was the evil aunt Holika, not Prahladika, who was incinerated by the fire. Bonfires lit at night during the annual festival of Holi commemorate the immolation of Holika and symbolize the destruction of our own wicked impulses. Rama and Krishna are respectively the seventh and eighth avatars of Vishnu. We'll discuss them more in depth next week when we talk about the Hindu epics of the Ramayana. Regarding deities and gender, and this is the second homework option for this week. Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva are indeed all depicted as male gods. They are male gods, but in the Puranic stories, they all have consorts or wives. So Saraswati, who is the patron goddess of music, poetry, and the arts, is the wife of Brahma. Lakshmi is the wife of Vishnu. And the Parvati, she goes by many names. She's also called Uma, is the wife of Shiva. We'll talk more about Shiva the week after next. Returning to what I said in the beginning of the lecture about the dual nature of classical Hinduism, there is on the one hand the more abstract and esoteric philosophical Hinduism that comes out of the Upanishads, where God is described not as an embodied being but as a principle, a form of universal consciousness in which we all participate. Here, the god Brahma is rendered as a neuter noun, Brahman. It's a more abstract theological notion. In the Puranas and the epics, God comes to earth. So this is Vishnu, usually. Vishnu comes to earth and lives out a life as an animal or a human being. This is the narratively focused Hinduism, the kind of Hinduism that everyday Hindus are more familiar with, really, the stories of the gods and the goddesses. What is the relationship between the more abstract philosophical Hinduism and the more narratological Hinduism of the epics and the Puranas? That's a problem that different schools of Hindu thought resolve in different ways. So I'll talk about Shaiva Siddhanta theology the week after next. We'll talk more about Sri Vaishnavism next week, the implications of saying that Vishnu is the supreme Godhead from whom all other gods are but emanations or projections. But I'd like to say briefly about gods and gender, male and female, is that in the narrative mythological Hinduism, all of the male gods have their female consorts, but in the more abstract philosophical veins of Hinduism, it's explained that each of these female consorts is, in fact, an embodiment of the supreme goddess, of a single goddess, the principle of female divine energy, Shakti, which is simply a feminine noun meaning energy in Sanskrit. She is also sometimes simply referred to as Devi or the goddess. So Parvati, Lakshmi, and Sarasvati are all, in fact, according to theological Hinduism, manifestations of the single Ur goddess. One of the more abstract schools of Hindu philosophy, Shaktism, emphasizes the importance of male energy and female energy in the animation of the physical world. Shaktism is particularly important in Shaiva schools of thought or schools of thought where Shiva is emphasized as being a god supreme above Brahma, and Vishnu, a common refrain in the school of thought, is that without Shakti, Shiva is a Shava. Shiva is a corpse. He can't do anything. That is, without his wife, all of his powers of creation, animation, and destruction are inert or useless. The necessary union of male and female is graphically depicted in the Yoni Lingam, the iconic representation of the power of Shiva, the linga set within the yoni, representing the female power of Shakti. Shakti, Devi, the goddess, has many physical or bodily manifestations beyond those of Sarasvati, Parvati, and Lakshmi. She is in her benevolent form, Ganga, the goddess of the Ganges. In her horrific form, she is Kali, the goddess of warfare and death. And in the mythological texts associated with the schools of Shaktism, there is a reversal of the centrality of male gods in the cosmological drama of the Puranas. The story of Durga, or the one of the ferocious forms of Shakti as consort of Shiva, represents something of a feminist retelling of the story of Narasimha, or Vishnu, as half lion, half man when he slays Hiranyakashipu. Durga's slaying of the demon bull Mahisha contains many of the same story elements as the Narasimha Avatara. The difference being that here the gods oppressed by Mahisha are appealing to Shakti rather than Vishnu to help them out in this situation. So here is a quick video on the story of Durga slaying Mahisha.
Hi, I'm Siana, and today I want to tell you a story about the goddess Durga. So Mahisha, who often took the form of a bull, he did all of his practices, all of his ascetic practices for years and years and years with this one-pointed ekagrata focus until finally Lord Shiva took notice. And he came to Mahisha and he said, okay, Mahisha, your practices have been very steady. What is it that you want? And he says, I want to be invincible to all beings. Well, Shiva looked at him and he said, okay, but there has to be one caveat. You have to be vulnerable to at least one class of beings. And Mahisha says, well, that's easy. Let it be the class of beings called women, because they will never be able to touch me. Okay, first mistake. Now, as he goes about becoming this great lord of the universe, and with all of this power, he plunders and terrorizes everyone and everything, and the world falls entirely into darkness. And the gods and goddesses get together and they say, what are we going to do with this demon? He's taking control over everything, all the worlds. And so they get together with Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. And the three of them create this triadic heart. And then the rest of them stand in a great community circle around them. And the three gods start to focus very intensely, and they focus a beam of light out of their third eye, and each one of them then blast out a laser beam of their third eye light right into the center, and the three laser beams converge. And from this ignited center, there starts to be this opening of this form, and the flames start to rise into the most lustrous form the world has ever seen, and it is the goddess Durga, riding fiercely, mounted upon her great lion. And she rides off to the base of the great mountain with her four priestesses, her four attendants, and she says, I'm going into my cave now for my own practices, and let no one disturb me. As she goes into her practices, she starts chanting the name of her beloved, who is Shiva. And she does her practices entirely motivated from the place of love itself. And she chants to Shiva, Namah Shivaya, Namah Shivaya, Namah Shivaya. And she's chanting out of love. As she's chanting and doing her practices, the mountain begins to blaze and light becomes restored again, once again to the universe. And as it's blazing, Mahisha takes notice and he says, who dares to make my world shine when I have plunged the whole thing into darkness? And so he goes over and he shapeshifts himself into a beggar, because he knows whoever this is must be very powerful. And he looks in and he says, oh, I'm just begging for some alms, please, great goddess. But the moment that he sees her, he falls desperate to have her for his own. And he says to her, I will give you everything. I'm the Lord of the universe. Please, 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 you have to be mine. And she looks at him and she says, no. She says, I am only for one who is pure of heart. My practices, Mahisha, are from the place of love. Your practices are for the love of power, and I want nothing to do with you. And she cast him away, and it infuriates him. And now the world goes even deeper into darkness, and the gods and goddesses come to Durga, and they say, what are you doing, great goddess? Why do you tarry with this demon when you could surely slay him in just the fraction of a second? And she says, do not worry, for surely this great demon Mahisha rushes against his dharma faster than a moth even rushes into a flame. He will be the cause of his own demise. And then at this point, the great battle emerges, and Mahisha arrives at her doorstep, and he takes the form of the great demon bull, which represents our most stubborn, habitual patterns that don't serve us. And she meets him, however he shapeshifts, and then he shapeshifts into a lion, and then into a blue striped tiger, and into the great elephant, and she keeps meeting him. And then he starts to take the shape of a man, but he's still a bull. And right at that juncture where he's half man and half bull is the moment that she slays him, and she puts the soft underside of her foot gently upon his head and subdues the demon, and the world is restored to total order.